Our discussions today will be moderated by Engineer Dante Briones, an advocate of the environment and clean energy, an entrepreneur, a teacher, and a leader. He is the founder, president, and CEO of Sanobi Solar, a solar PV systems integrator. He is also the teaching fellow of ICD, a member of the Management Association of the Philippines and UPIE Alumni Association, as well as the Philippine Institute of Industrial Engineers. May I now call on Sir Dante to tell us more on the speaker and what to expect for today's session.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We also the massive disruption that the current pandemic did to our lives the past 3 months on a global basis. While the number of people infected with the virus is statistically small compared to the total population of most countries, statistically that is because one life is one life. Its disruptive effect was felt and continued to be felt by hundreds of millions of people globally. One of the biggest reasons for this is the massive disruption of the supply chain, locally and globally, be it air, sea, and land. The whole world was paralyzed, and to a lot of extent, even the food security was put at risk for most countries. In the aftermath, however, as the world adjusts to the new realities, new business models emerged and new ways of getting the supply chain back on track became a must for businesses. We thought that inviting an expert like our keynote speaker today to help us navigate through this would be very, very timely. Thus, this webinar, Supply Chain Strategies for Business Continuity in the Pandemic Era, was put together by the Institute of Corporate Directors. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker. He is not only an expert in supply chain, but he's a well-taught consultant in operations management, lean management, business transformation, re-engineering, total quality management, Six Sigma, turnaround management, strategic planning, and the like. He is currently a professor from the Asian Institute of Management, got his master's degree in management engineering from the Nagoya Institute of Technology. Most of all, he is my fellow alumnus from the UP College of Engineering with a degree in industrial engineering, magna cum laude. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Rene Domingo. Sir Rene, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dante. So let me just set up. So good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to thank ICD for inviting me to conduct this webinar on supply chain strategies to help us address our different concerns in this pandemic era. So I will try to share as much as I can on this topic. I'll divide this into two. The first part will be a discussion of the different issues we face in supply chain disruption given this crisis. And then the second half, I will dwell on the solutions or best practices here and abroad that we can learn from. Okay, so let me start. So we're actually addressing two issues here. One is supply chain, the other one is business continuity. So I'd like to combine this into one topic. So I'd like to focus on supply chain continuity management. In other words, how do we ensure the viability and continuity of our business during this pandemic and even in the post-pandemic era, okay? What we call the new normal, okay? So we're not just talking about supply chain here, as I will elaborate later on. We're looking at the whole business model, the whole strategy of the company. Let me start off first with the definition before we go to the different issues. This is our baseline on how we look at this topic called supply chain. So we will define it as the integrated management of the end-to-end value chain. Okay, I will define what is end-to-end, and this is not your typical end-to-end scope. So why do we manage supply chain rather than companies? Okay, the difference is we can achieve much more if we look at our business as a network, as a business network, as a supply chain, because we can achieve goals that is not possible with a very narrow corporate view of our business. So one goal we can achieve is we can deliver better value to our end users if we work as a team, as partners. We can reduce uncertainty, very timely for this pandemic era, and we can reduce system-wide costs. In other words, everybody's costs can be reduced if we work together. Secondly, we can do things faster. We can respond faster as a group, as a network, rather than as individual companies. And with that, we can improve our flexibility. Secondly, it's win-win. In other words, if you work as a team with our upstream and downstream partners, we can make more money together rather than just maximizing profit by ourselves or solving the crisis by ourselves. And eventually, everybody becomes competitive. We can compete with other supply chains if we work together. Okay, so with that, let's go to the two views of supply chain. I believe there are still people who look at the conventional view of supply chain, and this is supplier to buyer. It's like an enhanced procurement or upstream process. Okay, but when we talk about end to end, and this is what we will talk about, is we want end to end from supplier to end user, not customer, the consumer, the one who will consume the final goods, the one waiting at the end of the pipeline. And in between supplier and consumer, there are many players, and these are the partners involved in this chain. So in agriculture, we call it farm to table. Okay, from the farmers down to the restaurant. Okay, in fashion or fast fashion, we call it runway or to retail or loom to rack. Okay, of course, in sustainable operation, we call it cradle to grave. If you want to really go to the end is really disposal of the product at the end of its life. So we expand our view of supply chain. It will be supplier to end user. And you can be any of these three. You can be here, you can be here, you can be here. So we will work as a team. In other words, we're going to talk about supply chain plus demand chain. This is the real supply chain. Fortunately, it's called supply chain in many textbooks, but actually it's a combination of supply and demand chain, the upstream and the downstream partners together. Okay, one of the challenges in supply chain management or even operation management is matching demand and capacity or supply. This is my definition of maximizing profit. If you can match these two together, you can really make tons of money because it's going to be waste-free. But this is difficult given the environment that we're in, even pre-pandemic or post-pandemic. If you're in this kind of business, then there's nothing to worry. There's no risk. Stable supply, stable demand. Everything can be planned, can be forecasted. Your forecast will always be correct, but this is very few. Or very few companies have this. Even utility companies don't have this. Then we have the one type in which you have stable capacity, but demand becomes unstable, disrupted. Then planning becomes a challenge here. You can lose money here. You can make money, but you need new way of thinking when it comes to this kind of business model. The other industries may have stable demand, but their supply is unstable, disrupted. And this calls for planning and a different kind of business model. But the world we live in right now is actually, you have both unstable supply and you have unstable demand. It's very hard to match the two. They are disrupted, both supply and demand. So in this pandemic, we have these two types of disruption. This is what makes the crisis very complex. This is not your typical supply disruption, which I will give you examples of later on. This is both supply and demand disruption, because all are affected, not only suppliers, even customers, even consumers were affected by the pandemic. With everybody were locked down. We have to quarantine everyone. You can be logistics, you can be here, you can be there. So welcome to the VUCA world of 2020. Okay? Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. So this is the real VUCA, the first VUCA we'll have to deal with. And the first impact of VUCA is on the supply chain, not on specific companies. It affects everyone, globally, regionally, locally. I just have this to show you an example. This from Agoda. You know, the tour and travel business have been businesses have been devastated by this crisis. They have this interesting promo. Well, of course, this is the way to try to revive demand. But take a look at what they're saying. You can book without credit card. You can cancel anytime. Even during the check-in day, you can cancel, and you can book now, pay later. Well, of course, this can entice customers to come in, but the problem is the supply side. It's very hard to plan this. You will have overbooking, underbooking, just like the airline, and this is going to be a tough value proposition. How do you plan the back end of this? Okay, so this is one challenge. How do you match quantity of demand, which is volatile, unpredictable because of your value proposition, with your capacity, which may not be that flexible? So volume, we will talk about this later on, volume matching. The other matching we'll have to deal with is quality or safety. I shared this in my post in Facebook and LinkedIn. So let me give an example again of the travel and tour industry. Okay? If you look at the airlines, they're trying to make the flight safer just to entice passengers, because right now they have zero revenue. Okay? They want to make the flight safer with this distancing or no middle seats and a lot of hygiene. The problem is this is not the customer experience. You have to start from his house. Okay? If the ride to the airport is not safe, then he will not leave his house. So make sure there is a match between this supply chain partner, which is the land transport, with the air transport. The next one will be the hotel. This is the next part of the supply chain. Is the hotel also safe, just as safe as the ride and the flight? And what about the restaurants you'll be dining in? Is it just as safe? And what about the tourist places, that tourist spots you will visit? Are they just as safe? So there must be a match in terms of quality and safety. Okay, plus the return trip, it should be just as safe. If any partner will be perceived as unsafe, then he will not leave his house. He will stay there. All of these companies will lose money. They will not generate if only one partner will just achieve his goal of safety and quality. Okay, so this is the value of supply chain, end-to-end thinking, especially in this pandemic. Everybody's doing their own little thing without coordinating with the other partners. Then this will be failure. This will be failure. Okay, before you can become, you must have tourists before you can have diners. Before you can have guests, before you can have passengers. So this is the key. Without tourists, all these partners will not make money. This guy will not leave his house. Okay, so I'm going to talk about supply network, okay, rather than supply chain. Originally, everybody thought it was a chain, a process flow. So we never got rid of this word chain. Actually, it's a network. Okay, let me show you the original chain. Okay, we convert raw materials to finished goods, passing through middlemen, and the customers get the goods. This is your typical cash cycle. Okay, from accounts receivable to cash to accounts payable. Okay? But this is not the only thing you manage when you talk about business continuity. Okay, we need to get the orders. Okay. It may be a information flow, but it's just as important as the physical flow. So if that is disrupted, you won't get any business. The other flow is, can you send orders to your suppliers? That can also be disrupted. It can disrupt the physical flow. Next is, we need a lot of information back and forth to the company. A lot of business continuity overemphasize this, with a lot of IT backups, contingency, but that's not the only critical flow, as we will see later on. If you don't have disruption here, and any other place you have disruption, this won't work. You will not have any business. More of this, people, we need people to run the company. Can your employee, these are physical flow. Of course, you have work from home, but you need people to run the company. You need contractors. You need managers. If they're locked down somewhere in the world, then who will run this? So this is part of business continuity. Make sure they can go home and they can come back. Somebody has to manage the company. Second flow would be utilities, of course. We need energy, water, telecom. Okay, and of course payment back and forth. We have to pay people. We have to get paid. Make sure that's not disrupted. We're not just talking of e-payment, even cash flow. We need cash. Okay, imagine being locked down without cash. You can have your credit card or you can have online facility, but if you don't have cash, you cannot survive in your house. You have to pay a lot of cash purchases, even in a lockdown. And one more is waste. If you produce a lot of waste, that must not be disrupted. You have to get rid of the waste of the company. It's like a human body. You can have drinks, food, air, water, but if you cannot get rid of your waste, you still won't survive. Okay, you have to get rid. So again, another part of supply chain. How do you get rid of this? And finally, if you go upstream, what about the supplier of your suppliers? We cannot supply, then you don't have a supply. So expanded view of the chain. So this is what you look at in supply chain continuity. Okay, when you design your business continuity, make sure they're not disrupted. Okay, any unreliable flow will be a risk to the company. And during this pandemic, we saw a lot of disruption. They were cut off physically, digitally. Okay, and then any of this is cut off, you cannot run the business. Anyone, for example, this one, customers cannot go to your stores because the roads are blocked. He cannot get, and you cannot deliver the goods to the customers because of checkpoints and all these roadblocks. Then this part of the chain is gone, even though the rest are okay. Okay. So this is what I talk about, what I mean by supply chain network continuity. So when you do your BCP, make sure you cover all flows, that you have a plan B and you have a plan A. Your plan A must be very strong. Okay. Okay. By the way, don't make your plan A weak just because you have a plan B. Your plan A should be very strong. Okay. You only use plan B as an emergency, but don't forget your plan B. It's like your spare tire. Your spare tire should be as good as your other 4 tires, but you don't want to use that, right? Your 4 tires must be as good as the 5th tire. This is the meaning of BCP. Okay, I'm going to talk about 4 types of crises that we see in this pandemic, and we will see in other crises. Okay. There are many types, but I like just to focus on 4 types. The first type is you will have a capacity logistic disruption combined with supply shortage or causing supply shortage. This is the most common supply chain disruption. Nothing happens to demand. Okay, nothing happens to demand. This is just what we call pure supply disruption. The second type is there is a collapse in demand, like what we saw now, and therefore you have a supply glut. This is another disruption. Okay, the system gets choked. Okay. Second type is a variant of B. You will have a demand collapse, supply glut, and you have, in addition to that, logistics disruption. Okay. This is a triple whammy. Huh? It's a perfect storm, so to speak. And then the last, people don't think this is a disruption, but to me this is a disruption. You have a demand surge, and then you will have extreme supply shortage. I'll cover all these 4 types, and we will see the solutions to address this. So the first type is logistics disruption or capacity disruption, resulting to supply shortage. So I like to look at this as this is your supply, this is demand, nothing happens to demand, but this is cut off, and this is also cut off or destroyed. Okay. You can have one of this and you cannot meet the demand. But in most natural disasters, and a pandemic is a natural, both are affected. Example, you will have the Great Hanshin earthquake of 1995. This caused a lot of disruption in Japan. Okay, this is very near Kansai, Hanshin, Kansai. This is the industrial center of Japan, not Kansai. So a lot of disruption because roads were cut, fires, earthquake. So this is the first type, the most common type of supply chain disruption. Of course, Japan was able to recover after the earthquake. Second type, of course, is the more massive Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 with earthquake. Okay, it affected a dozen countries. Huh? Imagine that, an earthquake in one continent affecting another continent. You'll never know where the destruction. And this just happened in a few days. Okay, just happened in a few days. So a lot of disruption. Hmm? Yeah, all ASEAN countries were affected. It even affected Africa. Another disruption type is the Thai floods of 2011. Okay, you know, a lot of industries in Thailand near Bangkok. So a lot of foreign companies supply chain were cut off. So, and you know, Thailand exports to other Asian countries, even to Europe. So a lot of disruption, floods. Okay. Of course, the more recent earthquake tsunami in 2011 in northern Japan, a lot of disruption again. And you have the Bangladesh fire of 2012 and 2013. This affected the apparel industry in Europe and the US because this is the main source of manufacturing of the industry. They manufacture most of the goods. Bangladesh is the center of apparel, should we say, in the world. But we'll go back to this later on. Of course, the more recent locally is our disruption last February before this pandemic and with the Taal eruption. And you know, the companies in Calabarzon were affected because the supply line is cut off the roads. And then more recently, of course, is the Wuhan Hubei outbreak. I don't call it pandemic yet. It was an epidemic at that time, sometime March, sometime February. Okay, there was no effect on demand, but the supply was cut. Okay? Because a lot of companies are located in the industrial province of Hubei, with Wuhan being the capital. So a lot of disruption. Okay? And this is one data from an importer in the Philippines. Because of that Wuhan lockdown, this is the first city to lock down. The production lead time increased 3 times, and lead time transport increased to 200%, and transport costs 300%. Okay, so a lot of business disruption came sometime February, March because of this Wuhan lockdown. Okay, in fact, Hyundai, GM, Volkswagen, Toyota were among the first companies that closed their China plants. They affected almost a lot of brands who were outsourcing to Wuhan and Hubei. More recently, and that was February, in April, Honda, because of supply disruption, and this is already a pandemic, not an epidemic, they have to shut down 2 domestic plants in Japan because of lack of parts coming from outside. And the same with Ford. They have to stop. This is now more recent June because they ran out of seats. Okay. Okay. Now we have the pandemic of 2020. From 2029, epidemic became 2020 pandemic. So this is an example of a supply chain disruption. Okay. There was no hoarding of meat, but the U.S. supermarket ran out of meat. Why? Because they have to shut down the meat plants in America. Why again? Because a lot of workers got infected with COVID-19. They have to shut down, and many workers don't want to come to work. So this caused a lot of supply disruption of meat in the US. So this is a typical type of supply disruption. So we go to the second type. This is demand collapse with supply glut. This is very unusual because we don't see this in previous crisis wherein only supply was affected. This time demand is also affected. So demand drops, you have a glut in supply. This is a lot of disruption. And industries usually affected, but it's not limited to these two, are those with short shelf life or those with continuous production. You cannot stop production regardless of demand. Like oil, you have to keep pumping. Agriculture, you cannot stop the plant from growing, from ripening. So, but demand has crashed. We will see the effect of this later on. Okay, so now we have 2 problems: supply and demand. So let's start at the end. The end is lockdown. Nobody's shopping. Nobody's flying. Nobody's eating. Even if you have social distancing, you're half empty. Okay, restaurants are opening, but they're not open. They're only 50% open. So this affect the demand side of, let's say, food and travel. So what's the effect? Well, less cars are needed. No cars because you don't need a car. So, but they still keep producing cars at some point in time. So supply issue is, where do you put all those cars? Where do you put all those refined oil, the fuel? They didn't stop the refinery. Production of oil continued, even though demand has collapsed because no planes were flying. And speaking of planes, where do you park the planes? This is a supply disruption. Okay? You see this all over the world, even now. Very few planes are flying. So let's take a look at oil. So what's the disruption in oil in particular? Okay, demand has collapsed, but they still keep shipping them, producing them. So they run out of storage. Now they cannot unload from the ship, from the container. So the whole ocean became parking lot, became warehouse of oil. One point in time, look at those little dots. Those are oil tankers who can never unload. And consequence, price collapse, even to negative. The price of oil became negative. Now they have recovered somewhat, but again, this is the impact of that disruption. Supply disruption, supply glut because of demand collapse. Let's talk about agriculture. In agriculture, according to this article, farmers with no found out they have no buyers for more than half of their crops. So half of their demand collapse. This is worldwide because of the closing of restaurants, hotels, and schools. Another interesting fact is because we eat in our house because of the lockdown and nobody wants to venture out. We don't eat in restaurants. This affected the sales of vegetables. According to this study, Americans eat more vegetables when they eat in restaurants than when they cook for themselves. So imagine that. Okay. So again, this further reduced the demand. Consequence, supply glut of vegetables, and they're all buried. These are, I think, potato. They have to be buried here. Or they're not harvested. They're allowed to dry up. They're crushed, okay? Because there's no storage. There's no way to send them to the market because there's no demand. They're left on the ground to dry up, to spoil. And of course, what a waste. Look at this milk. They're being spilled all over because there's no way to store this milk. Okay, prices in terms of broiler chicken. Of course, just like oil, at one point in time, the price of chicken dropped to 40, and their production cost is 75 per kilogram. So they have to sell at a loss. According to this report, it's even worse than the bird flu outbreak in 2017. But I'll go back to this chicken broiler business later on. Okay, so solution, you have to kill all those birds. What a waste again. Pigs is the same, pork. 700,000 pigs will have to be euthanized. Okay. So another way, select crops. Again, prices collapse, chicken collapse, a little bit of recover here. Pork collapse, and all these other meats, cattle, hogs, chicken, and all future commodity drop from corn, wheat, glass. This is sometime middle of March. Cotton, soybean, all because of supply glut, because of demand collapse, leading to price collapse. Okay, let me talk about the third disruption. This is a similar to the second one, but there is, in addition, a logistics disruption. Okay, how is that possible? Sure, there is drop in demand. There's a glut in supply. There's still little demand to serve, but there is a logistics disruption. So you cannot send the goods, even though there's little demand to serve. There's still some demand to serve. So example, Baguio. Okay. Baguio is the country's source of vegetables and fruits. and flowers. And their main market is not Northern Luzon. Their main market is Metro Manila, NCR. Okay? Without NCR, this industry will not survive. Okay? They already have enough for themselves, so the excess have to be sold in Manila. So what's the problem? Well, as I told you, nobody wants vegetables, nobody wants flowers. There are still people who needs this, but there's a disruption. There's a checkpoint. Roads are closed. Slow down, even though they're considered essential. Because of the long lead time, the crops, the food will spoil. So they'd rather not send it to Manila because of the long travel time. Even in Thailand, they have an additional disruption between Cambodia and Thailand. They have to disinfect all cargo. Okay, so the crops will be affected. It will slow down the entry of goods. So these farmers would rather keep the goods and destroy them in the farm rather than spoil them on the way because of this checkpoints and other bottlenecks in the system. So consequence, again, a crash. Yeah? Vegetables in Benguet sold at 10 peso per kilo. This lady has to shred all her flowers because it cannot be sent to Manila. And carrots from the ground back to the ground, only to be buried again after being harvested. Okay, the fourth type is shortage with demand surge. Okay, there are merchandise whose demand suddenly surge, and this will cause a lot of disruption, which we call shortage. Okay, so how is that? Okay, surge in demand, supply is down, shortage. So we'll have a problem. Example, personal care, hand sanitizer, mask. As you can see here, during the lockdown, hand sanitizer increased by 6 times. Same with mask, facial tissue. Okay. So imagine the manufacturers of these items. They will have a production problem and a capacity problem. So what happens is the opposite. Overprice, gouging, price gouging. Look at the price of Lysol. Huh? This 10 times. Price of mask went up 30 times. So this is the problem with these kinds of disruption. Later on, I will talk about the solutions to this. Even in America, during the corona outbreak, they sold a lot of guns. Okay, so I'm not too sure what happened to the price of guns and the supply, but definitely this will have an effect on the weapon supply chain. Okay. It's possible that you will have high demand, no supply, and on top of that, you will have a logistics disruption. You cannot send it to the buyers. This is just a variant of the last case I gave you. Example is toilet paper. Everybody wants toilet paper, but there's no toilet paper. All countries increase their consumption. From Japan, 14% more, to Italy, 140% increase. So what's the problem? What's the problem? It's not just supply. There is disruption. They cannot get the raw material. The manufacturer cannot get the pulp. Why? Because they're caught in traffic. This is in Europe. It's jammed. Okay? This is like your Baguio vegetable, except that in the Baguio vegetable, there's very little demand. But here, demand is so great, but they're still caught in traffic. So they cannot produce enough toilet paper, even though they have factory capacity. They have no raw material. So another type of disruption. Before I go to the solutions, this is the second part, let me just discuss a very interesting example of a shortage crisis. This is the vaccine. I foresee a very big problem with this vaccine so in terms of supply chain. I think everybody, of course, we have to vaccinate almost 8 billion people residing in almost 200 countries. So this is a huge demand for this. Everybody's focusing on this. How long do we get the vaccine? How many years? How many months? I think everybody's focusing on this, just on the development side. But this is not the real problem. This is less than half of the problem. The bigger problem is the supply chain. How will we administer this to these people? It's very long supply chain. The first one is production. How do you produce this, mass produce? You need a lot of horses to do this, a lot of animals, okay, to replicate, to produce the vaccine. This is going to be a supply problem of horses. Next is the packaging, syringes and vials. Now we have shortages of this. Okay, you may have the vaccine, but not the packaging. You cannot vaccinate. And these are special package. Like the vial, you need glass, and you need special glass. It should be made of quartz sand. You need this raw material to produce the right vial to preserve the vaccine for its efficacy, for its shelf life. And guess what? This quartz sand can only come from rivers, not from mountain. And then we'll run out of rivers. This is going to be ecological disaster once we start mining the rivers to produce so much for this. Okay. Talk about the factories. How many factories can produce this? Next is, where do we store this? Billions. And how do we administer this? How many nurses? How many hospitals? So this may take 2 years. This may take another 2 years. Okay. So just because we have this, we're not done yet. We have to worry about the end-to-end, what we call end-to-end supply chain. Okay. So talk about strategies. So let me just share some supply chain continuity strategies to address all those 4 types of disruption. First is rationalization, consolidation. What do you mean by this? Okay. Get things more efficient, consolidate them, be more efficient. Okay. In February, Honda announced, I'm talking about Honda Philippines, announced that they will stop production in the country. Okay. I think this was because of the Taal volcano. But even without Taal volcano, with the March pandemic, I think they would have closed down anyway, because the pandemic is much worse than the Taal volcano. Reason, they will want to allocate it more efficiently, the distribution of resources, they want to optimize. Okay? They're already consolidating. So one strategy is efficient allocation and distribution of resources, meaning they will only produce in some other country, consolidate all their production plant. Instead of several ASEAN countries, they'd probably just produce it in Thailand. If you look at the ASEAN car industry, it's similar to this Toyota complementation scheme. The parts, the ASEAN agreed that every country will produce parts of this car. It's like Airbus, okay? Airbus parts is produced in many European countries. That's the agreement. So similar to that. Now, the problem is this. You have a lot of moving parts, a lot of transport, a lot of costs, and each country may not have the volume. So what will happen, I think, is everybody will consolidate, stop their production, and move towards Thailand. This will become bigger and bigger, because this is the center of gravity of this complementation scheme. Okay, a lot of cars are being produced. Okay, so the other strategy of consolidation is reduce models. Okay, reduce the variety, reduce the geographic focus. Okay. Have focus on geography, focus on efficiency. This is the Nissan strategy. They've decided, as I mentioned, they've decided to close the plant in Indonesia and in Barcelona. And the reason being they want to reduce models, focus on certain areas. So this is one strategy to address one of those issues, okay, of cost reduction, right sizing. I know this is painful. It's a social problem. It will cause unemployment, but this is how companies will ensure their continuity. A little bit of supply chain in the financial world, financial supply chain. More recently, a lot of issues with Hong Kong, and people are wondering, what if this is disrupted because of the protests, a lot of issues in Hong Kong. So the AmCham, or the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, polled their members, and this is their plan B. If they have to move out of Hong Kong, they shortlisted 4 cities: Singapore, Sydney, Tokyo, Bangkok, and Taipei. Okay, and the winner here is Singapore. Okay, Singapore. Most likely, this is their plan B. Things gets worse. Now again, this is consolidation, because they look at the city which can address most of their needs: infrastructure, currency stability, business environment. Okay, so this is they're not gonna spread out their financial supply chain. Okay, they're gonna pick something like Hong Kong. Okay, but with less issues. I'll go back to supply chain later on with the financial sector. Okay, so let me just go to this interesting industry, CPG, or the consumer packaged goods. According to this interesting study, we order groceries online. Definitely, this will increase. This will increase very rapidly. But interestingly, even in-store sales of packaged goods went up. So even though we can now go to supermarket and grocery, people buy this packaged goods. They less of the fresh goods. Okay. So imagine the impact on the production of these packaged goods, not only on packaging but on the manufacturers of the brand. So what's the solution for these kinds of demand surge and you don't have capacity? The solution is like making of cars, reduce variety, reduce model, SKU, and flavors. So this is the strategy of Oreo, Coke, Pepsi, Campbell. They're trimming down their variety. This is in contrast to their old normal strategy of coming out with new improved variants. So look, what is the reason? To simplify the supply chain, to speed up the production process. Because you lose time every time you change lines, you do setup, to reduce setup time. And they can focus their advertising money, distribution, and efforts to a few products. Okay. The idea during this crisis is production, not variety. So we'll see less and less variety in the grocery because this is the strategy of these brands. These are all great brands. The other one is direct marketing. Okay, cut the middleman so that the farmer can sell directly. Okay, so value is destroyed because you cannot send it to the market. So we saw this earlier. It's destroyed, crushed. Okay. There's another thing destroyed. Another value. This is the profit of the farmers. Remember what I told about the broiler? Okay. This is the farm gate price of the broiler sometime in April. Okay. Farm gate 40 to 50. This is their production cost. I did mention this. The farmers are losing money. The farmers are losing money. Guess what? You pass this on to the trader. What is the retail price? It's still the same as the old normal, still 135 to 180. So even though the farmers are not making money, the traders are making money, the retailers are making money out of this. So this inequity we have to solve. Okay. So how do you solve this? Farm to market, farm to consumer system. And the Kadiwa on wheels, this is a government initiated, helps to promote that, in which farmers can sell their goods directly to consumers at retail prices. So they capture the value and goods don't spoil. Okay, so you have different, even San Miguel is collaborating with this. They're using the Petron gas stations to sell farm goods. This is part of Kadiwa. And the UP Baguio has its own initiative to have the farmers sell their goods directly to consumers. Okay, so these are good initiatives. So these are details of the Kadiwa. So they have Kadiwa Retail, Kadiwa on Wheels, Kadiwa Online. And it's not just crops, they even seafoods. Seafoods can be sold directly. And they have served almost 1 million households in Manila. Okay, so this will still increase. Look at the amounts, but it's a good model to solve these wastages and losses of the farmers. What's called direct farmer to consumer system. Okay, the other strategy is end-to-end supply chain visibility. Okay, so in the old normal, this is the typical relationship of these three players. Okay, if the supermarket runs out of inventory, it orders from distributor, then it orders from manufacturer. It sounds logical. The problem is this takes time. It's not real time, and by the time you get the order, demand would have changed either up or down. Okay, and in a VUCA world, demand can go up, can go down. So what will likely happen is it's not synchronized with the market. Okay, once this is going down, this is going up. This is going up, this is going down. So you see a lot of shortage in inventory. Very wasteful system. Looks logical but very wasteful because it's too slow to react. This is not a partnership. The better model, which you call it, information sharing, is the retailer shares the data with the distributor and manufacturer in real time. So when demand changes, and during pandemic, demand can change, it's synchronized. They will stop producing what is not selling, and they will increase production of what is selling. So it's a very efficient system. This is part of what you call information sharing, or sometimes you call it just-in-time distribution, or vendor managed inventory, to avoid what we call bullwhip. This is bullwhip. You'll see a lot of inventory in the system because it's unsynchronized. You can apply this to apparel and fast fashion, because in fashion, things change very fast. So they share information, visibility. You can apply this to financial systems, because nowadays suppliers have two kinds of problem, which boils down to the same problem. They need money. Okay, the first type of supplier is they don't have cash. They have a lot of fixed costs, so they will get more loans from the bank, more credit lines, even though the demand is crushed. The problem is the bank takes time to approve because of collateral, etc., etc. Okay, so what Timal, this is Alibaba, did was link up with HSBC. So HSBC can see the whole supply chain. They can see that this supplier is still selling goods. So it can be assured of a viable business, because it is Alibaba shares the whole transaction from end to end. Because of visibility, HSBC have more confidence with the business, and it can finance up to $500,000 without collateral and financial documents. So this is the kind of banking we need during this crisis. The other financial strategy to address supply chain is increase lending frequency and shorter days. Okay, this is unfinancial, former Alipay and Cabbage. So they can approve loans within minutes. Again, no collateral, no financial document, because they lend more frequently. So this is the solution in the financial supply chain. Okay. So another one is assessing and selecting suppliers in the new normal. We have to do a paradigm shift. We cannot evaluate suppliers the way we do in the old normal. This is the old normal. Okay. Pick the lowest bidder, negotiate longer terms of payment. Does he comply with minimum quality, SLA? Delivery, is he financially capable? Does he have track records? Does he pay taxes? Does he pay minimum wage, etc., etc.? This is typical valuation of a supplier. I'm not saying we should get rid of this, but I'm saying in addition to this, we have to look at other dimension of our partners. Okay, in this new normal. This is not going to be temporary. I think this is going to be permanent. One is you must get trustworthy and highly capable. Why is this so? Because you may not be able to see the supplier very often because of quarantine and face-to-face contact, less face. You have to do e-inspection. You have to trust his documents. You have to trust the pictures, the video that he shows you. Okay, he has to be trustworthy. You cannot do plant inspection. So this is key. This is key. You have to trust these people. Secondly, the supplier must be nearby and must be located in low-risk location. You cannot choose a low bidder who is very far from you. That's high risk because of lockdown and a lot of uncertainty. Okay? Or maybe he's in a high-risk location of pandemic. Is he transparent, traceable? Can you trace his products? Can he show you proof of origin, not only of his raw material but also his people? Okay? Is he comprehensive in terms of EHS, environmental health and safety? Is he following biosecurity, biosafety standards? Okay, we never checked this before, but now we have to check this. What about his contingency planning? Is he look at his disaster preparedness? Does he have redundancy? And most importantly, check for his BCP. Does your supplier have a BCP plan? If he doesn't have a BCP plan, forget about this. Forget about this. This is nothing. This is not going to be sustainable because your supply will be high risk. Will be high risk. Okay, a little bit on strategy, but social responsibility is very important in this day and age. It's not just about saving costs and downsizing. Okay, let me show you about Bangladesh. Let me go back to Bangladesh, that country that had fires earlier. Now, Bangladesh is a leading producer of apparel in the world. In fact, most of the branded apparel must have come from Bangladesh. The problem is because of the drop in sales in the US and Europe, because of lockdown and malls are closed, okay, so 10%, almost 3 billion Bangladesh orders were cancelled. And the Bangladesh factories have to finance this inventory, and they get paid upon delivery. But the problem is they already start to produce, and because of that, they have to lay off people. 2 million out of 4 million. This is 50% of the workforce of the garment industry, okay? Because the buyers failed to pay for the canceled shipment. Okay? And those who are willing to pay will only pay 60% of the agreed price. I think this is social irresponsibility, yeah, on the part of many buyers. Okay? This will cause massive social crisis in the country. Okay? So the whole industry consists of 4,000 factories employing 4 million people. And these are mostly women, workers, limited skills, and that's their only livelihood. Okay? And almost 90% of Bangladesh export is apparel, generating 1/4 of the jobs. So these are the companies that outsource, to name a few, to Bangladesh. But there's a bright side to this. Okay, so 2 companies that I can cite here are H&M and Primark. Okay, and H&M, you're familiar with H&M. It's the last buyer of Bangladesh apparel. Okay, it has pledged to take delivery of garments already made or in production. So what I'm saying is be socially responsible. Okay, though demand has dropped, you should support financially your partners. And Primark, this is the competitor of H&M, pledged to keep paying the workers of the contractors affected by its decision to cancel orders. So this is part of strategy. Huh? Honor your contracts, look at the financial situation of your partners, and help them to cope with the crisis. Okay, so let me just summarize the strategies. Not really summarize, complete it, add some more. The first strategy, this is my second to the last slide, is diversify. Okay. When I say diversify, that doesn't mean go all over the place. No. Instead of 1, have 2. Two is good. Let's say you're just dependent on China market. Have another market like Europe. Okay. If you're just dependent on China, you will have a problem, or just dependent on US. Diversify your source of material. Again, you can have 2 countries rather than 1. Process centers, if you have 1 factory, build another one. Okay? Delivery channels, make sure you have 2 multimodal, you have 2 routes. You can do land, air, and ship. Okay? Plan this when you do your BCP. Diversify, but don't over diversify, because that will entail another risk. Second one is consolidation. Huh? Less of outsourcing, more of insourcing. Localized rather than international or then globalized. This is more a relative term. I'm not saying purely localize or purely do everything in-house. Consolidate. Move things closer to you. You have control. So if something happens, you can still manage the moving parts because it's closer to you. You have control. Related to integration is co-location. Put your partners around you. Okay? If you have your own factories, subsidiaries, locate them together. A cluster. Okay? Not spread out all over the world where real estate and wages are cheap. Okay, that will increase your risk. Let your suppliers, contractors move closer to you, or choose customers, contractors, and supply closer to you. Same with customers. Okay, build your plant near the customer, or get customers closer to the plant. So there you eliminate distance. Distance is risk during this pandemic, as you can see, because of logistic disruption. Simplify your product. I did mention this examples. Reduce variety. Produce products with longer life. And use standard materials. Don't use rare materials, exotic materials that come from some faraway country. Once there is a disruption, you cannot produce the product because you need that rare material. So when you design the product, you avoid these kinds of materials coming from some faraway country. Again, do risk assessment in whatever decision that you do. When you design your product, select a customer, select a supplier. Always look at these risks of that decision. Look at the biosecurity and biosafety aspect of that. Risk assessment, not just ROI, not just cost savings. Focus more on this, because this will become more important than cost or even profit. Okay, next is involve your stakeholder to participate in your business, not just your employees. Let your supplier do some processes, get them on board with your strategy. Let your customer participate in some process like DIY, or let the supplier do some of your process instead of just producing. Let them do some sub-assembly. So you're doing your own process in many locations, not just on one factory. You involve your partners in co-creating and co-producing the product. Second, again, I mentioned this in direct marketing, reduce the middleman, okay? Less moving parts, the lesser risk, less transaction, shorten the lead time, and you can make the supply chain more transparent and more traceable. Okay, select strong partners, share information, as I mentioned before, especially point of sale, improve visibility of the supply chain, share the risk and cost. Do not exploit your upstream partner. Share the risk with them, and develop win-win goals. I put ARAP. What is AR? Accounts receivable, accounts payable. This is what I'm saying. Whoever is the more liquid should help the partner that is less liquid. For example, you're more liquid than the supplier. You can pay his accounts payable earlier, huh? Or pay all his past due. Or if the customer you're more liquid than the customer, don't collect his AR right away. Extend it to help him with his cash flow. That's what we call win-win partnership. Of course, I did mention the social responsibility, safety sourcing, ethical sourcing, sustainable sourcing. Make sure everything is done safely, ethically. Make sure it doesn't come from some wild animals, or what they call illegal logging. Sustainable, everybody knows this. This is green sourcing and compliance to contracts. Be fair. If the contract is gonna hurt the partner, review the contract. Okay. Renegotiate so that everybody wins in the relationship in the long run. Okay, so finally, let me conclude with this slide. Many of you are board members, and what's the role of a board member in the new normal? Okay. So this will have to change. Okay, and this is related to my previous discussion. The typical board would meet, say, monthly to cover all these areas, more of governance and financial prudence. Okay. CapEx, dividends, basically financial and strategic in nature. Now, in the new normal, the board will have to be more active, more proactive. It should become the conscience of the company. Okay? This should be part of your role in terms of governance, not just financial governance. First is EHS. Make sure the management is very thorough on this. You have to ask the CEO in detail, how are you dealing with this? Are we safe here in terms of biosecurity and biosafety? Yes, the CEO and top management should be conversant about this. He cannot just delegate the answer to some department head. He should be on top of this program. Should be able to answer questions, especially about BCP. Is the company really disaster ready, disruption ready? What are the system structures? I shared your slide earlier in the beginning about the different supply network disruption that's possible. Ask the CEO, are we covered on all these possible scenarios? What's your plan B? What's your plan A? Is your plan A the best? If it fails, what is your plan B? And maybe a subset of BCP is supply chain continuity. Okay, you have to ask the management about sourcing. Are we sourcing ethically, safely, sustainably? Is our supply partners traceable, transparent? Are they socially responsible? Ask him to show to show the board how do you select suppliers? What's your basis? If his answer, we just choose the lowest bidder, then that's not a satisfactory answer. Yeah? He has to go back to what I mentioned earlier, the new thinking. Yeah? We need strong partners, not just cheap partners. We need strong partners who can survive together with the company. So I guess that completes my discussion, and we'll have time for questions. But before that, if you want to read my other ideas on how to deal with the crisis, supply chain, and other things, you can go to my Facebook and LinkedIn accounts. Just go to hashtag RTD COVID-19. You will see a lot more ideas there about how businesses can cope in terms of marketing, production, and supply chain. I have my website. You can have, I have supply chain articles here also in rtdonline.com. And I have my YouTube channel where you can see also some videos I produce on supply chain, and that's my email. Okay, Dante, so it's your turn.
Wow,
Thank you.
that's a very scholarly presentation, Professor Rene. Thank you very much. We now open the floor for Q&A, and we have several interesting questions in the Q&A box. But before I read them through and throw the question to you, I have several points to make in the light of the pandemic that my own business has experienced during the pandemic that I'd like to share with the audience, right?
Sure.
More than ever, this pandemic has forced my company and companies like mine to review and accelerate the implementation of technology, right? You talk about inventory visibility, you talk about knowing where the goods are, knowing where they're going, know where they're coming from. It requires a lot of technology, things that we used to ignore before now becomes very relevant and must. So as a business, we try to make sure that we leverage technology to make sure that, you know, a simple Teams meeting, we could, 3/4 of my workforce are working from home. And we have to be able to be as productive with as possible, even with compared to the previous normal, because it is now the new normal, right? All the productivity tools, technology is necessary. The second that touched me quite a bit in your presentation is trust. In my business, and I'm sure this is the same for other business people in the audience, we requested our suppliers to be paid online. If we have to cut the check to pay you, you will not be our supplier anymore. Because we don't have the facility to cut manual checks and go to the banks because the banks are closed, or the trip to the bank is impossible. In the same manner, our customers, we plead our customers to please pay us online. And because of that, there's got to be some trust. There's got to be a reinvention of the processes and the touch points that we have, not only with our customers and also with our vendors, which kind of answer one of the questions in the Q&A, which says, is end-to-end, does that mean it's customer touch point? I think by end-to-end, we think of the touch points with the customers, with the vendors, with the stakeholders, and make sure that everything that moves is visible. But I have one interesting question for you.
Sure, Dante.
Came from Ana Maria Marabut. I hope I pronounced her name. What should the management focus on? What should the management decide on? You touched on this earlier with the board. For the organization to the new normal. And my ask of you is, can you be specific to the small and medium-sized companies like ours? And what should we do first to make sure that we are able not only to survive this pandemic, but to take opportunities that it presents?
Well, I covered this in my previous webinar and in my post. The first pass is 2C plus 2S. Okay, this is your vital signs. Okay, the first C is cash. First, you should have cash, liquidity, to pay for your recurring expenses and to restart the business. The second C is customers. You have to inform your customers you're still around. You're ready to serve once the economy reopens. The first S is staff. Make sure you have the essential staff with you, so you can restart the business. Then the last is the supplier, which we talk about. Assure that the supplier that you have to be assured that supplier that you can restart the business with him. So those are the basic defensive strategy. Okay. Now, what's the offensive? I call this the pivot. You have to pivot the business if the demand has dropped, especially collapse. You cannot do more of the same in the new normal because it's not going to be a new, improved, old normal. The new normal is not the new, improved, old normal. It's going to be a different ballgame. You have to pivot your business model, your business, your products, your culture, everything. And I did a previous webinar on this topic. So that's about as specific as I can. Now, how to pivot really depends on which industry you're in.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to supply chain a little bit. You talk about disruption in Baguio, talk about disruption. I have a friend who's one of the biggest manufacturers of canned goods. He says, yeah, pork prices and beef prices are dropping like crazy, like what you mentioned,
Yes,
Professor
yes.
Domingo. But I cannot produce enough canned meat because the tin cans are not allowed to travel to my plant, and so therefore there's the shortage. But what are your thoughts on what we are experiencing today, which is called the hyper-local or the community-based market, right? I mean, in my subdivision, which I don't think is unique, I think it's happening in most villages across Metro Manila, for example. I mean, I can buy 1,000 pesos worth of vegetables from Baguio, delivered it to my doorstep. I could buy alcohol. I could buy almost everything in my neighborhood and delivered in my doorstep. And I pay through, GCash or PayMaya and all that. What's happening? What is going on in the market today that allows this to flourish? Is this temporary or is this going to be part of the new normal?
I think this is part of the new normal. Less travel, less exposure to other people. So translation, you don't want to get out of your house unless it's absolutely necessary. This is not only about haircut or beauty parlor. This goes to grocery, food, especially food. Okay. The only problem is healthcare. You have to go to hospital. The doctor will not see you. Huh? That's the only problem with this community base. Huh? You cannot let the doctors come to your house. Maybe the barber can come to your house. So what is happening in terms of consolidation? Your basic necessities come near you. Huh? There'll be more groceries around you. Okay? So it's like 7-Eleven is your neighborhood shop. More of that, but at a lower cost. Huh? Wet market prices, not 7-Eleven prices. So this will happen in the new normal. Huh? People will they will no longer travel to faraway malls just to get some excitement. That's gone, right? You're not gonna
Right.
travel through EDSA for 2 hours just to get to another mall. You'll see a mall which is walking distance from you. So this is gonna be the new normal. Huh? It's a co-location. It's a community. Okay, even CBD, commercial business, will have to be a cluster, self-contained, self-contained, self-contained. Okay, walking
Okay.
distance or bicycle distance if you want.
Right. And that's a good thought because I shared the same question to my friends in the retail industry, and most of these are the big ones. I said, what's going to happen to the big retail chain, and what's going to happen to your business when the neighborhood market is flourishing and the neighborhood everything is flourishing? He said, no, we're fine. And our new normal, as far as supply chain is concerned, is we have a facility to serve our market online. Right? We cannot manage our store the way we used to manage our store. We need to have a facility that when
Yeah.
they place the order and you say that it's available, you will be able to deliver. Although apparently they have some challenges in the beginning because when you do store buying, if the stocks are not there, then the consumer knows right away. Today, the biggest problem is consumers place their orders, and then after a few minutes of plugging in all those orders in the computer, the system will tell you that they're not able to deliver, things like that.
Yes. Yes.
So the technology plays a big role even in the big business and make sure that they're able to do that. But what strikes me the most is the fact that they cannot count on the big distributors anymore. And they are, and in relation to what you're saying, they are developing local based suppliers so that they could buy the goods in that locality to present in their supermarket or in their groceries.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so the local economy starts to flourish, which I think is one of the silver linings of the pandemic. Gone are the big distributors who control the supply chain. Now there is a distributed supply chain to support the community-based
Yeah.
purchases of our consumers. What do you think, Professor?
I think you're correct. It's like every business will become a wet market. Wet market, you only go to the neighborhood wet market. You don't go to a faraway wet market. So even the dry market will get closer to you. Okay? Because you destroy distance. You don't need distance. Okay. Now let me go back to your technology thing. This technology is a lot of hype. Everybody's going online. They think it's about programming. It's about app. But 90% of e-commerce is physical. It's bricks and mortar. That's why you have inventory problems, stock out, you have delivery. It's still logistics. You need physical flow. We need supply chain. You cannot digitally transform all the parts of the supply chain. Okay. Okay. You can have telemedicine, but you still need to send the samples.
All right.
Yeah, telemedicine, show me the sample. Okay, maybe X-ray, you can have X-ray, digital.
Right.
What about the sample of my blood? You cannot use the internet for that. So you still have to logistically bring that sample to the hospital or the other way around. So a lot of this e-commerce, telemedicine, all this tele, it's not about technology. It's about physical flow. It's about supply, the things we discuss. So the solution is proximity and reliability of partners. They have to be co-located.
All right. So proximity is the key. We have an interesting question from somebody I know. This is not about physical goods. This is somebody named Joe J. Doctora, who is a fraternity brother of mine from the University of the Philippines. He goes, I am wondering what the supply chain network of the financial institutions like banks would look like in the new normal. What's your thoughts, Professor?
You want me a fearless forecast? Well, bank will have to reinvent themselves. Okay, as I mentioned in my examples, the supply chain will have to be robust, financial supply chain, less processing, but more accurate. You get more with less data, because people, you cannot interview people anymore. You cannot check all these physical assets. You have to trust people. Okay, you have to trust people, and you have to support the transaction with less hassle. Okay.
Right. Well, to that point, Joe J. and Professor Rene, I have my personal experience because in running my business, we have workers who are unbanked, right? We used to pay cash. And I think the new normal, the cashless transaction from mobile technology, from fintech will proliferate. I think that's my previous forecast. I think the Gcash of the world and the PayMayas of the world will get more market share. Now, interesting enough, in relation to this question about the bank, without promoting this bank unintentionally and without putting down the other banks, I am so delighted to tell all the audience that there's this bank. I'm not going to tell you who they are unless you PM me. That I opened an account and applying for a credit card without showing up to the branch. I'm like, hallelujah, it's now being done, right? They got all the information online. I gave it to them online, and because of that, I actually applied for a corporate banking account with them, and it's delightful. So this bank had been connecting rural banks across the nation, specific to those areas where 3G and 4G is impossible, using blockchain technology. So I think the future of electronic banking, because of this pandemic, is become more imminent and will be accelerated moving forward. So that's my answer to you, Jose. We have another interesting question from Perla Toleta. We have a lot of questions actually.
Yeah, I can see them.
Trying to consolidate
take your pick.
I have my heart for the small players because my business is also a small business. So from Perla Soleta, small players will find it so difficult to continue operations because of this pandemic. What can you recommend or suggest to them? I'll take my first cut, Professor Rene.
Sure, go ahead.
The first thing I did was to cut costs. You wouldn't imagine how creative you could be in finding out costs that does not matter. You really have to bite the bullet and make sure that any costs that are not necessary, you just have to cut them. And it is so difficult for us to lay off workers. We had to lay off workers because there's no activity and we cannot continue to burn our cash. But what else can you add to that, to that obvious thing?
Well, I'll go back to my previous suggestion. First is, of course, you have to cut costs, the unnecessary costs, which you call waste. I never believe in cost cutting. I believe in waste cutting because some costs are necessary. Okay? Make sure you cut the right costs. But more importantly is you have to pivot. Now, the advantage of SME is they're smaller, more flexible, more agile. So they can switch business faster and quicker than the bigger companies, which are really top heavy, a lot of barriers to changing business models. So an SME is run by entrepreneur like you. You can change business model overnight without reporting to any board or SEC or any creditor. You don't need that.
I have to report to my wife.
You report to your wife. So it's a matter of just convincing your wife, hey, we're going to change business tomorrow. And that's it. It's a board approval. You cannot do that with listed corporation, with those IPO. You cannot do that. So look at SME as an advantage. Being small is an advantage. Okay, size matters in this pandemic. You're like a yacht compared to a big cruise liner. You can change direction. So reinvent yourself. Okay, reinvent yourself. Okay, and then borrow money to fund your new business. Don't borrow money to fund the old business. It's gonna be a waste. Gonna be waste.
That's a good point. We have an interesting question from Miss Sarah Fairhurst. She goes like, how long do we put these changes in place for? The role of the board of directors is to assess the risk facing the organization. The biggest next risk is probably the one we haven't found out yet, or we have not thought of yet, rather than which is now what we can see now. So need to keep thinking about the future, not just the current. What would be your comment to Ms. Sarah?
Well, the biggest risk really of all that network that I show you, that's my, I think, 4th or 5th slide. Remember that network is the demand side. Because once that demand side is cut, the rest becomes irrelevant, no matter how efficient you are. So make sure you're in the right market. You're still relevant in the new normal market. That's the first requirement of business continuity. It's not IT, it's not cost, it's not redundancy of telephone lines. It's the assurance of a demand, continuous demand, for you to prosper, to pay your salaries, to pay for your loans. Because without demand, if your demand collapses, that's the end of the line. That's the first thing you look for in a BCP, not the supply chain. It's the demand chain. The demand chain is the most important. The customer facing, as you mentioned. Once you lose your value proposition, forget about cost, forget about payroll, forget about cost cutting. It becomes useless because you have no sales.
Correct.
You have no sales.
I kind of agree to that, Professor Domingo. As I mentioned to you earlier, I'm in the solar energy business. And the nice thing about our industry is, once I scan the horizon, it seems like the demand for solar energy has not waned in spite of the pandemic.
That's good.
My feeling is the demand has actually increased quite a bit, went up a notch. So my thinking is, if I could preserve my cash and survive the periods that we have no revenues and continue to pay interest to the banks, I think we will be okay.
Yeah, you're correct. So let me summarize what you said. BCP, what is BCP? Ensure first the demand chain is gonna be lasting. Then you work on your supply chain. Don't do it the other way around. Because you're not even sure of your demand. You're fixing your supply chain. The supply chain just supports the demand. Okay? So are you still in the right market?
Okay. I agree with you. I fully agree with you. So there's your answer, people. Demand chain first. Make sure that before you worry about your business model, you worry about if there's a demand first, there's a market for whatever
Exactly.
you're trying. All right, we have a question from a certain Mr. Rolando Bacani. This is an interesting question. And I kind of have the same question in my mind when you were showing the slide, where the petroleum companies had to pay the buyers
for storage.
So his question is, how come the oil prices in the Philippines continue to rise? I'm not sure if it is.
It's very easy to answer. Traders. Have you seen that chicken broiler thing? Huh? The farmers are selling at the loss, but not the traders. It's the same concept. It's the middleman. It's
I
nothing to
see.
do with the manufacturer or the end user. Somebody makes money in this crisis, and it's not us, right?
I see.
And it's not the producer. It's not the
Okay,
producer.
here's another question. Um, what is your comment about retailers that are selfish with their data and do not help FMCG companies with their production planning?
Well, I think this is part of the lesson today. Huh? Forge and force a partnership. You have to force it's crisis, right? The only way we can survive this is together. We're in this together. If it does not share data, then that's it. That's suicide for both of us. You have to sell that idea. You want to make money? You want to make more money? You have to share data with us. Okay? Sure, I will make money, but you will make more money. This is how to sell a partnership. So if once you can convincing of that, he will forget about this selfishness and
Right.
this, being secretive. Okay.
I guess the short answer to that question is you are doing business with the wrong partner.
With a grown partner. Okay. Who you cannot trust. Who does not trust you? Then he's not a partner. A
All right,
partner should share secrets. If a partner cannot share secrets, he's not a partner.
correct. I kind of know how to relate to the next question because I'm in the solar construction and the bulk of my cost in the construction is obviously labor. The question is from Ms. Yvonne Yuchenko, and her question is, usually labor cost is 60% of the cost, and that kind of apply to my industry. It is so difficult to cut this out. You want to comment on that?
Well, again, this is the area of re-engineering. I'm not talking about laying off people. In other words, develop a lean line using technology, using high productivity. So you right size, and then you form another line that is also right size. The problem with many companies, they keep hiring, then they become overstaffed. Then it's hard to downsize. The biggest problem is we don't have this lean thinking in our minds. We always hire too much, not only people, but also too many machines. We buy too much material. We have too much of everything, too much budget, right? So we end up downsizing later on. This is not good planning. I think this is where the board should come in. They have to ensure a lean organization, lean structure, lean production line. So you don't have this problem of bloated labor costs. Then suddenly you cannot cut labor costs. The problem is global competition. If your competitor has lower labor component, he's gonna beat you on price. Then that's how you become uncompetitive because you don't improve productivity. You keep hiring people and not use them wisely.
All right. We have a comment and a question at the same time from Ms. Ana Maria Acuña. Thank you for this very helpful supply chain strategies. Can we consider them as business model changes rather than BCP, since this should be done on an ongoing business as usual basis?
You know, I don't believe really in BCP as a term. All strategy must be long term, and long term means continuity, viability. Business continuity is similar to business viability in the long term. What's the difference? We're not just talking about disaster. The biggest disaster is not supply line; it's demand line. If your demand line is cut off, where's the continuity to talk about? I think we have a very limited view of BCP. It's more about technology, phone lines being disrupted by earthquake. The first disruption I mentioned to you. No, that's not BCP. The real BCP, your strategy should be long-term and assure the survival of the business and the industry. And then you work backwards to your supply chain, to your infrastructure. And that's what we call strategic thinking. You innovate, you have a pipeline of ideas. You never become irrelevant. That's business continuity. Innovation is part of business continuity. If you run out of ideas like Nokia, you're dead, or Xerox or Kodak, right? Where's the business continuity there? They lack strategy. That's strategy. And now they're gone. It's discontinuous. See what I'm saying? So forget about this dichotomy between strategy and BCP. They're one and the same. When you form a strategy, BCP is part of it. It's not some department doing it, some vice president doing it. That's a CEO job. It's integrated into the strategy.
There you go, Ms. Acuña. I hope you got your answer. We have another interesting question. I don't know if we are in a position, I certainly am not in a position to answer this, but this is an interesting question. Direct marketing and removal of several levels of distribution channels, as well as subcontractors and ESPs, will reduce the cost of sales. On the other hand, the tax revenue collection that used to be generated by government units would also decline. Has the tax revenues implication been quantified or projected for 2020 in your line of work, Professor Domingo? Did you have any studies done on the effect of the tax collection for 2020 with this kind of event of what's happening in the economy?
I think all countries, not just Philippines, will have to take a hit in terms of revenue collection because the world economy is down. It has slowed down. It's expected. You have to manage expectation. Slow growth is a given, even negative growth. We should not regret this. It's a part of this cycle of we call the pandemic crisis. The issue is we have to pivot. We have to re-engineer the whole government sector. The way we generate revenue for national treasury. Okay. Because Ghana, the real estate, Ghana, the personal income tax, because economy is down. So whereas when you get, even the casinos are closed, where do you get this? We have to rethink the way we source revenue for the government. So that's the right question. I don't know the answer, but that's the question. How do we reinvent revenue sources?
Right.
Because
Well,
that's the old normal sources, by the way, Dante. We have to have the new normal revenue source.
applies to the government sector
It
as well.
applies to the government too.
Correct. We promise each other that we will stay away from questions relating to
I know.
But I have one interesting comment from a certain Mr. Francisco Alampay. He says, Professor Rene, thank you for your excellent presentation, which helped explain the major disruptions in business and society. My only question, have your talent and experience in supply chain management continuity been tapped by our government? If not, should ICD not make it a contribution to bring experts like Professor Rene into the COVID socioeconomic recovery planning and implementation?
Well,
So if Leonard Berba is listening, there you go.
well, I share all these ideas not only to the Philippine government, to all countries, because everybody's in trouble. All my ideas applies to every society, every government. Okay? So it's not just us who are in the worst condition. There are many other countries in a much worse condition than us. Right?
Yeah,
So
that's great.
I welcome helping anyone, any society. Right? My ideas are free. This webinar is free. My posts in Facebook, LinkedIn are all free. Okay, you can mine those things and convert them to strategies. This is my mission. Okay, help everyone to help themselves.
Oh, excellent, Professor Domingo. The country definitely needs you. We are almost out of time. We have time for maybe one or two questions. We have something from Mr. Ricardo Rabang. What are the main benefits of logistics synchronization in manufacturing industry and service industry? I don't know exactly what he meant by logistics synchronization, but perhaps you could share your thoughts.
Well, logistics synchronization, I believe, is the way he puts it, is to synchronize all the movements of the partners. It's like lean thinking again. You only produce when there is demand. You never overproduce or underproduce. This is perfect synchronization. Like what I shared with the supermarket sharing the data with the manufacturer and distributor. That's synchronization. It's a timing. You produce at the so you don't overstock, you don't understock. This requires technology and trust. Two T's, technology and trust. The only way you can synchronize is you have technology. I'm sorry. You have to have trust first, and then you have to have technology. Then you can synchronize. By synchronizing logistics, all parties make more money or save more money. Okay.
All right, there you have it, folks. Thank you very much, Professor Rene Domingo of the Asian Institute of Management, a product of my alma mater, University of the Philippines College of Engineering.
Thank you too, Dandy. Thank you.
As Professor Rene Domingo aptly said, today's models are the new normal. And those who can adapt and leverage what they have as the new order will flourish. Those who will strive to wait for the old normal to come back will probably perish. We hope that this event is as worthwhile for you as it is for us in ICD. We would like to thank our keynote speaker, Professor Rene Domingo, for the very insightful and very scholarly presentation and session, and for expertly answering our questions. And of course, thank you very much to all our attendees today, and may we all flourish under the new normal. Maros, let me pass it on to you. Thank you very much, and a good afternoon to all of you. Have a safety and healthy afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Professor Domingo of AIM and Engineer Dante Briones for leading the discussion today. We hope to see everyone in our upcoming Survive and Thrive series. We have one on June 23 at 10 a.m., June 29 at 4 p.m., and July 7.